Hello, I'm Jennifer Hancock. This is Ask a Humanist for October 2012. And I'm actually going to start at the beginning again because the beginning didn't record. So we're going to start and, welcome. The first question we're going to deal with is, how do you feel compassion for people who are evil? And this comes from my friend Swami. And this is actually going to be the topic pretty much of the entire program. But in order to talk about the problem of evil people, we have to talk about the problem of evil from a humanist perspective. And then we can talk about, okay, well, how do we apply this to human beings? Now, the problem of evil is often difficult for a humanist because it's such a religious concept, and we don't have a religious framework for our thinking because we're not religious, we're humanists. So, but on the other hand, there are behaviors and actions that occur that seem evil, and that the word evil is the best word to describe what just happened, because our emotional morality is just triggered by certain events that are so heinous that we're just like, oh, that was evil. The problem is applying that word to a human being becomes really, really problematic, because a lot of times people are doing these things that are heinous and causing all this suffering for what they think are good reasons. And the primary example of this is Hitler. Most people think of Hitler as someone who is evil, just flat out evil person. Not everybody did, and not everybody does. There's people who still admire him for what he did. But most people look at what Hitler did and think that was evil, therefore he was evil. But his stated motivation for doing what he was doing was to do good. He just was doing it in such a way that was pretty heinous. So most of us view it and go, that was evil. And the same thing can be said of the 9/11 terrorists that flew the planes into buildings. What they did was evil, but they thought they were doing something that was going to result in something good. And I think we need to distinguish between acts of evil and the people who perpetrate those acts, because I don't think, the problem with labeling a human being as evil, even if we label their acts as evil, is that we write them off as kind of not human in a way. I mean, this is like the religious artifact. If someone is evil, they're possessed by the devil. They're just not, savable. They're evil. And I think that's a mistake to label humans that way, because it doesn't recognize the fact that, A, they're human. They're human beings. And this is part of the potential behavior of humanity. Yes, humanity is capable of tremendous good, but it's also capable of tremendous evil. And I think that if we label people as evil, we label them as other, and then it doesn't help us solve the problem. Because when we recognize this potential in ourselves, it opens up the door to us figuring out why. Why do some humans go on to commit acts that almost everybody considers is evil? Because when we start asking that question, why do some humans take this route? That's a question that has answers and possible solutions. And just labeling someone as evil doesn't encourage us to ask those questions at all. So the distinction might be slight for a lot of people. The act is evil, but the person is still a human being worthy of our compassion is very, very hard for a lot of people. But for a humanist, it's central to how we're going to start thinking about solving the problem. And because we've taken this approach, the humanistic psychologists and evolutionary biologists and people like that, they're actively working on this question. And the only reason they're able to work on this question is because they're viewing these human beings who do evil things as human beings. And they want to know what happened so that they can hopefully fix it and prevent it from occurring in the future. Because we're not just content to say, oh, this person's evil, let's lock them away so that they can't do this again. We want to prevent other people from following down this path, because that's a potential path for humanity. So now that we know that, what can we do about that? How can we mitigate against that? That's a very productive line of questioning, but it's only possible if you recognize the humanity of the individual and kind of view them through the lens of compassion. The next question was, how do we respect people who are doing evil things and are doing harm to other people. And this is, again, it comes into compassion. You know, the difference between respect, feeling compassion for someone who's doing something who's bad or evil, and do we respect people? And to me, the issue, again, respect is kind of a loaded word, and it can mean so many different things. And how we think of what respect means kind of dictates this answer. If we think of respect in kind of general terms, I don't respect people who do, I don't respect the actions, again, and I don't accept that we have to accept bad actions. I think there's things that we can do to fix problems. But do we need to respect the individual if they're behaving poorly? And I think let's talk about kind of not technical. There's this idea within humanism that each individual is worthy of has dignity and worth. You know, the respect of the individual, that we respect an individual human being as the individual that they are. And I think that use of the word respect is very different from the very common usage of the word respect as it relates to, you know, the behavior of individual humans. So, yes, we have to recognize that each individual we're dealing with is a unique individual, that there's not necessarily, we can't lump them in. So if, like, I'm married. My husband does something stupid, I need to respect him as an individual and not lump all other men. You know, not all men do the same stupid things my husband does. And my husband doesn't always do the stupid things he does. And I'm a woman. I do stupid things all the time, but that doesn't mean all women do stupid things. You know, could just be me. And I think in this sense, respect is understanding the individual is in fact an individual, and that generalizing their behavior onto a group of people is a mistake. Because when you meet someone and you say, oh, this person is going to be stupid in the way that these other people I know in the same group who have these same characteristics is stupid, that's a mistake, because you're not respecting that this is in fact a unique individual who might not share those traits even though they are a woman or a man or whatever. Right? That's very different than looking at the individual and saying, what you're doing is really stupid and I don't respect that behavior. So I think we need to be careful with the word respect, because it's really hard to respect someone who's doing something evil. And I think in the general terms that no, you don't respect people who are doing bad or doing evil, because they're doing bad or they're doing evil, and they might not be able to help doing what they're doing. But that doesn't mean we need to respect it and give it the weight of respect that we would give if someone was doing good. So we have to respect that they're an individual, not generalize their behavior into generic classes of people. But we don't have to respect the behavior itself or the individual if they're just really horrid. The problem is that we still benefit in our problem solving, in our interpersonal relationships, by extending our compassion to these difficult people. In the same way I was talking about earlier with the problem of evil, is you don't have to like a person to give them a little bit of respect as an individual and to think about them compassionately so that you can do a better job of understanding why they're behaving the way that they are. And the benefit of doing that is if you just write them off and say, I don't respect you, I don't want to have anything to do with you, but you have to work with them or you run into them all the time, then you're never going to solve the problem, you know, the conflict problem that you have with them. And it might not be solvable, you know, it might not be solvable, but you're not even going to make an attempt to solve it unless you recognize and respect the individual as an individual and try to figure out why they're behaving so poorly. Is it something you're doing? You know, maybe there's something about how you're behaving that's triggering a past trauma for this person. and you don't even know what's happening because you don't know anything about this person's history. You don't know what they've experienced or not experienced, or what they've been through. You don't know whether they've just lost a child and that's why they're behaving horribly. You don't know anything about them. And as soon as you step back from, oh, this is a horrible person, I don't like you, I don't respect you, and start thinking about them compassionately and say, wait a second, okay, you're a human being just like I am, and respect them as a human being, even if you don't respect their actions, you can start thinking about the conflict in a new way. And this new way is often very, very productive in terms of helping you solve the conflict. Now, that doesn't mean every conflict is solvable, but you can't even begin to try to solve that conflict unless you're willing to consider that the other person, as horrible as they're behaving, has some reason that they're behaving this way, because they do. People don't behave arbitrarily. You know, they're influenced by any number of things. You know, my son on Monday was behaving quite badly. He was having meltdowns, and he's 7, and he almost never has meltdowns. Well, he had camped all weekend, and he hadn't gotten a lot of sleep, and he wasn't feeling well. He was coming down with a cold. He wasn't feeling well, and he was tired. So, yeah, of course he behaved poorly. He wasn't in as good a shape as he normally is to moderate his behavior, and that he should. You know, says the mom, I'm compassionate with him. I understand why he's behaving badly. But, you know, when you extend this and you think about the people you work with and you interact with on a day-to-day basis, and especially the difficult people, you start thinking, well, okay, what is it that I don't know about where they're coming from? And can I change something really simple that will change the dynamic for this person? Because I know, you know, I've been stalked. And there's certain things people can do around me, and they don't even know they're doing it. It's not... that'll trigger like the flight response in me from the stalking. And it's not because this individual is a threat to me. It's that they're triggering something from my past that makes it difficult for me to act rationally because it was traumatic. So you just don't know when you're dealing with difficult people who are really obnoxious and really going out of their way to be rude, what's causing them to behave that way. And so I think the issue of respect is if you respect them as a human being, as a unique individual, that allows you to feel compassion for them and try to look past their behavior into the why, as opposed to just saying, I don't respect you, I don't like you, I don't want to have anything to do with you, and writing them off. I think that's a mistake, especially in a business environment, to just write people off and say, I don't want to have anything to do with you. That makes you part of the problem as opposed to part of the solution. So I don't recommend it. And again, it's really hard because when people are obnoxious, the tendency is, I don't want to deal with it. Speak to the hand and walk away. But making the effort to figure it out sometimes is really worthwhile. But only, you know, you decide if that's worthwhile. Okay, so the third issue was the issue of dignity and worth. Humanism is pro-human rights. The word humanism implies a respect for humanity. We believe each individual human has inherent dignity and worth. That's not the same thing as we've just discussed as respecting a particular individual and their behavior. But it does mean that we treat people as the individuals that they are, and that even if they're behaving badly, they're still a human being, and we all have the same potential for goodness and badness, and that we should be looking at that and looking at the situation that might make a person behave that way so that we can come up with better solutions. And we talked about this in the first segment. You know, if we just write people off and say, oh, they're in this group and they can't, like we used to do, you know, 200 years ago with slaves. Oh, they're just stupid and they're not really, they need people to help them figure out how to live their lives. And, you know, we're helping them. No, you weren't. We weren't. You know, that was a view of a segment of humanity that as less than human, that not the same level of human as the rest of us. And that doesn't respect the dignity and worth of every individual human on the planet. And there's 7 billion of us. And the 7 billion of us live all over the world. We all have different experiences. We all have different upbringing. Some of us are being brought up in war zones and have the trauma of that. Some of us have more privileged upbringings where we have plenty of food and loving parents and a roof over our head. the point is that we all have different experiences, but within that, there is a common thread of humanity and a variation within our common thread of humanity of certain emotions, certain desires, certain dreams. Most of us would like to find someone to love and to love us and to be in a relationship with. Not everybody. A lot of people want to have families at some point. Not everybody, but most. So there's some threads and commonalities between us all as humans that we can extrapolate. And this is a lot about what happens with the theory of mind, that I have a mind. I know what's going on in my head. And I can, to a certain extent, guess that the people I meet have similar things going on in their head, with variations, obviously. And then, as we've learned from science, there's a bunch of different brain anatomies. Different people have different skill sets depending on how their brains are wired, how we're raised impacts that, but our genetics also impacts how our brains are wired. So there's a lot of variation within the human family, the 7 billion of us. And some of us are more naturally conservative. Some of us are more naturally liberal. There's differences in how we respond to fear that dictate whether someone's liberal or conservative. There's people who are weeds, that they thrive in any environment. There's people who are orchids that need very specific environments to thrive, and if they don't have that, they kind of crash. So there's a lot in the nature-nurture that we're learning about. But so much of our society's problems require us to figure out why people are behaving the way they are in order to figure out what they need to do better. And that requires us to understand that they're an individual and not just write them off as evil. I've been talking about this next example a lot recently. About a month ago, Arab News had an article that said genies don't cause epilepsy. And when you say this to someone in the West, they're like, well, of course not. Epilepsy is caused by, problems in the brain that have to do with brain chemistry, and do you have the right sorts of salts, or a short circuit going on, things like that. But it was only like 100 years ago in the U.S. that we treated epilepsy as a demonic possession ourselves. We're not that far removed from a supernatural solution, and the solution was to exorcise the demon, which pretty much never worked because that wasn't what the problem was. And then what would happen is, with mental illnesses and stuff, we would say, oh, this person has been possessed by the devil. We're not able to exorcise the devil, so we're going to just lock them away or banish them so that they don't harm society. And what respecting the dignity and worth of human beings does is it says, no, that's not what's going on. We're going to respect that this is in fact a human being and that something might have gone wrong for them, as opposed to just saying, oh, they're evil, write them off. What went wrong? Can it be fixed? So I think it's really important in so many areas of our life that we respect the dignity and worth of the individual human being as we interact with them and as we try to solve our problems with them and with them. Because we have so many problems in society that we need to solve. We have crime, we have education problems, we have the climate change issues, global conflicts, regional conflicts. We have a reformation going on in the world of Islam right now. We have all sorts of problems we have to deal with. There's the fishing, name it. And then on our day-to-day level, how do we interact with people at the supermarket? How do we interact with people in our offices and where we work? These all require us to work with other people to solve these problems. And in order to do that, we need to, do it. So it helps us to remember that each individual human being is, in fact, a human being. They're not cardboard cutout walk-ons in the movie that is our life. They're real individual human beings, and if you recognize that and you are committed to treating them with the dignity and respect that we all want to be treated with, it makes solving those interpersonal relationships and problems so much easier. Way easier. So there you go. Dignity and worth, absolutely humanist concept for a reason. It helps remind us to be compassionate with the people that we deal with, including the difficult ones. No, we don't respect the actions, even as we respect the individual as an individual, as we try to figure out what caused this individual to behave so poorly, as opposed to just writing them off. And I do think this is, I talk a lot about humanism. It works. Why does it work? It helps us solve our problems more effectively. And these are the tools that help us do that. And our interpersonal relationships and our interpersonal problems are at the root of most of our problems. So it is really important that we figure that out. And being compassionate and recognizing and respecting the fact that people are in fact individuals helps us achieve the right frame of mind to solve those problems. That's it for this week, but I'm going to, I'll be back in November. Maybe it's Thanksgiving. I don't know if I'll be able to come on or not. It might be December. We'll see. But for now, thanks so much. This is Jen Hancock, Jen the Humanist, Ask a Humanist. If you have any questions, email me at jen@hancock.com. If you're interested in more of these programs, I have books and video programs available. Just go to jen-hancock.com and you'll get links to all my books and products. If you're having problems with difficult people, I recommend you get my book, The Bully Vaccine. It's how to deal with obnoxious people, bullies and other obnoxious people. And it's really, really helpful. It's based on operant conditioning that really works. So bye for now.